Seizing the point. On September 15, 1944, 5 infantry battalions of the 1st Marine Division embarked in amphibian tractors. They clambered across 700 yards of coral reef to smash into the island of Peleliu. Marines in the amphibian tractors, LVTs, were told the operation would be tough but quick. A devastating amount of naval gunfire had been unleashed before their landing. The 1st Division Marines still had grim images of their sister division, the 2nd's bloody attack across the reefs at Tarawa 2 months earlier. But the 1st Division Marines peered over the gunwales of their landing craft and saw an incredible scene of blasted and churned earth along the shore. Geysers of smoke and dust caused by exploding bombs and large-caliber naval shells gave the Marines hope. Maybe the enemy would become quick casualties from the pre-landing bombardment, or at least they'd be too stunned to react and defend against the hundreds of Marines storming the beach. Ahead of the Marines were waves of armored amphibian tractors mounted with 75mm howitzers. They were tasked to assault any surviving enemy strongpoints or weapons on the beach before the Marines landed. Ahead of these armored tractors, naval gunfire was lifted toward deeper, more dug-in targets. Navy fighter aircraft strafed north and south along the length of the beach defenses, parallel to the assault waves. Their mission was to keep the enemy defenders subdued and intimidated on the beach as the Marines closed in. Naval gunfire was shifted to target the ridge northeast of the landing beaches and used to blind enemy observation and limit Japanese fire on the landing waves. This ridge would later be known as the Yermer-Brogel Pocket, or just the Pocket, and was one of 2 deadly unknowns to command planners. The other unknown was the natural traits of the pocket. Aerial images showed it as a gently rounded north-south hill that commanded the landing beaches 3,000 yards distant. From these early images, this elevated terrain was camouflaged in jungle scrub, almost entirely unaffected from the preparatory bombardment and artillery fire directed at it. But instead of a gently rounded hill, the pocket was a complex system of sharply uplifted coral knobs, ridges, valleys, and sinkholes. It rose 300 feet above the island and offered superb positions for tunnels and cave defenses. The enemy had made most of what this terrain provided during their extensive occupation and defensive preparations before the Allied assault. Another problematic issue for the Marines was the plan developed by Colonel Nakagawa, the Japanese commander of the force on Peleliu, and his superior, General Inoue, on Koror Island. The Japanese defensive tactics had changed considerably from their defeats on Guadalcanal and Cape Gloucester. Instead of depending on spiritual superiority, Japanese defenders would use their Bushido spirit and banzai tactics to throw Allied troops back into the sea. Japanese forces would delay and try to bleed attacking Marines as long as possible. The enemy planned to combine the devilish terrain with a resolute discipline. Japanese soldiers would only relinquish Peleliu at a horrible price in blood to the Marine invasion. This wicked surprise marked a new and vital change to Japanese defensive tactics compared to what they employed earlier in the war. Nothing during this trip to the beach revealed any elements of the revised Japanese tactical plan. They bounced across a mile of coral fronting the landing beaches. Amphibian tractors passed several hundred mines intended to destroy any craft approaching or running over them. These mines were aerial bombs detonated by wire control from observation points on shore. But the preliminary bombardment had disrupted the wire controls, and the mines did little to slow or destroy any assaulting tractors. As the LVTs neared the beaches, they came under fire from mortars and artillery. This fire against moving targets generated more anxiety than damage, as only a few vehicles were lost. But this fire did show that the preliminary bombardment had not eliminated the enemy's fire capability. Even more disturbing was when the leading waves of LVTs nearing the beaches were hit by heavy artillery and anti-boat gunfire from concealed bunkers on the north and south flanking points. Enemy defenses on White Beach 1 were especially deadly and effective. The 3-1 Marines, under Colonel Steve Sable, were in a savage beach fight with no means of communication to understand the situation. Japanese guns knocked out several amphibian tractors carrying essential control personnel and equipment. The mission of seizing the point had been given to Captain George Hunt, a decorated veteran of the New Britain and Guadalcanal campaigns. Hunt developed his plans, which entailed specific assignments for each element of his company. These plans were rehearsed until every Marine knew his role and how it fit into the company's strategy. Each hour on D-Day brought heavier than expected casualties. One platoon was pinned down all day in beach fighting. Survivors wheeled left as planned onto the flanking point. While they advanced, they pressed their assault on several enemy defensive emplacements. Pillboxes and casements were carpeted with small arms fire and smoke from demolitions and grenades. The climax came when a rifle grenade hit the gun muzzle and ricocheted into a casement, setting off explosions and flames. Enemy defenders ran out of the rear of the blockhouse with their clothes on fire and ammunition exploding in their belts. Marines waited in anticipation of the enemy's flight and cut them down with small arms fire as they burned alive. Captain Hunt's Marines held the point, but his company was reduced to platoon strength with no other nearby units. Sketchy radio communications got through to bring in supporting fire and a desperately needed resupply. One LVT made it to the beach before dark with mortar shells, grenades, and water, evacuating casualties as it departed. This ammunition made all the difference in that night's brutal struggle against a determined enemy's attempt to recapture the point. The next afternoon, Colonel Raymond Davis of the 1-1 Marines moved his Company B to establish contact with Captain Hunt to help hold the desperately contested positions. Hunt's company reached the platoon survivors that were pinned down on the beach fight during the day. The newly reinforced company recovered their artillery and naval gunfire communications, which proved critical during the second night. That evening, the enemy counterattacked the Marines at the point. The Japanese were narrowly defeated. By mid-morning, survivors of the two Marine companies had secured the point and looked out on 500 dead Japanese soldiers. On the right of Colonel Chesty Puller's struggling 3rd Battalion, Colonel Russell Honsowitz, commanding the 2nd Battalion, took artillery, mortar, and machine gun fire from still effective enemy beach defenders during their landing. The 5th Marines' 2 assault battalions also took heavy enemy fire as they fought through the beach defenses toward the clearing's edge, looking out eastward over the airfield. On the right flank, the 3-7 Marines crossed in front of an imposing defensive fortification flanking the beach. Luckily, it wasn't as close as the point position and did not suffer heavy damage. But its enfilading fire, along with natural obstructions on the beach, caused Company K to veer off their planned landing and end up out of position and out of contact. After the confused and delayed battalion regrouped, they used a line of large anti-tank ditches to guide their eastward advance. Any further delay would be a disaster to the division. Momentum was the key to success. The divisional plans on the right called for the 7th Marines to land 2 battalions in a column on Orange Beach 3. As the 3-7 advanced, it would be followed by the 1-7. These units would tie into the right flank and attack southeast on the beach. After a bloody hour of fighting, all 5 battalions were ashore. The closer each battalion got to the pocket, the more tenuous its hold was on the shallow beachhead. For another 2 hours, 3 more of the division's 4 remaining battalions joined the attack and pressed the momentum that General Rupertus had ordered. Colonel Puller landed his forward command group close behind the 3-1 Marines. He was ready to fight, even if his location would deny him the best position for supporting fire. With reduced communications and inadequate numbers of LVTs to follow in waves, he struggled to improve his regiment's situation. His left flank had 2 platoons desperately struggling to gain control of the point. Puller landed the 1st Battalion behind the 3-1 to reinforce the fight for the left flank, but was hindered by multiple losses in the LVTs. The 1st Battalion companies had to be landed singly and committed piecemeal into the action. On the regiment's right flank, the 2-1 Marines recaptured the west edges of the scrub, looking out to the airfield. In the beachhead's southern section, the 1-7 Marines were delayed by the heavy LVT losses. This successful early opposition was felt throughout the rest of the day. Most of the 1-7 eventually landed on the correct beach, but many Marines were driven leftward from heavy enemy fire and landed in the 5th Marine Zone. This caused the 1-7 to join in with the 3-7 and advance east to assault prepared enemy positions. The battle raged with heavy opposition from both east and south. In the mid-afternoon, Marines ran into a blockhouse, supposedly destroyed by pre-landing naval gunfire, but had not been touched, and put up a strong resistance. The cost in Marine lives and lost momentum by having to assault these heavily defended blockhouses was harsh and unnecessary.